The Zhuangzi and Its Impact by Victor Mair. Description: as a literary text, the Zhuangzi is sui generis, and its influence upon later literature has been enormous. No other work of the pre-Qin period, with the possible exception of the Shi Jing, Book of Songs, and the Chu Qi, Elegies of Chu, can begin to compare with it in this regard. The Zhuangzi has been translated and studied variously. Among the most influential translations are the Japanese by Fukunaga, 1956, and Akatsuka, 1974. In English, the text appeared first in the 19th century, Giles, 1889, Legge, 1891, and again in the early 20th century, Feng, 1931. But the most widely used translations are more contemporary, Watson, 1968, Graham, 1981, also newly Mair, 1994. The importance of the Zhuangzi for literature can be measured in two ways. First, the unique qualities of creativity and fictionality that it presents through metaphor, allegory, fable, and parable, written in a combination of vibrant prose and memorable poetry, and second, the indebtedness of writers from the Han, 206 BCE to 220 CE, to the present who have drawn on it extensively for images, expressions, themes, and overall inspiration. No other Chinese text dating from before the advent of Buddhism in China displays the awesome imaginative powers and linguistic dexterity of the Zhuangzi. Indeed, the Zhuangzi, in all these respects, is highly unusual and utterly unprecedented. In addition, its rhetorical mode, style of argumentation, yogic practices, mythic reverberations, and nirvana-like wish to get beyond life and death, samsara, also are unusual to the point that one suspects an international dimension to its formation which is only now being cautiously investigated by Victor H. Mair, Christopher M. Skipper, E. Bruce Brooks, and others. Until their research is complete, however, we must restrict our inquiry to the text itself and its influence upon later authors. Since I have already treated the literary aspects of the Zhuangzi in a series of other recent publications, in this chapter I shall concentrate on the significance of the text for philosophy and religion. Studies in this area that I will draw on include several collections of essays, as well as studies of individual chapters or topics. Although I will focus on the philosophical and religious facets of the Zhuangzi, it should always remain clear that the Zhuangzi is distinguished from other books associated with pre-Qin thinkers by its literary playfulness and satiricalness. History. The author. Any study of the Zhuangzi begins with the recognition that neither the composition of the text nor its authorship is a simple matter. Because the book bearing the name Zhuangzi is obviously associated with the thinker known as Zhuangzi, or Master Zhuang, it behooves us to address his historicity and claims to authorship. For this we have little else to depend upon than Sima Qian's 145 to 86 BCE biography of Zhuangzhou in chapter 63 of the Shi Ji, Records of the Historian. He says, Master Zhuang was a man of Meng, and his given name was Zhou. He once served as a minor functionary at Lacquer Garden and was a contemporary of King Hui of Liang and King Xuan of Qi, 3rd century BCE. There was nothing upon which his learning did not touch, but its essentials derived from the words of the old masters. Therefore, his writings, consisting of over 100,000 words, for the most part were allegories. He wrote An Old Fisherman, Robber Footpad, and Ransacking Coffers to criticize the followers of Confucius and to illustrate the arts of the old masters. Chapters such as The Wilderness of Jagged and Master Gung Sang were all empty talk without any substance. Yet his style and diction were skillful, and he used allusions and analogies to excoriate the Confucians and the Mohists. Even the most profound scholars of the age could not defend themselves. His words billowed without restraint to please himself. Therefore, from kings and dukes on down, great men could not put him to use. King Wei of Chu heard that Zhuangzhou was a worthy man. He sent a messenger with bountiful gifts to induce him to come and promised to make him a minister. Zhuangzhou laughed and said, 1,000 gold pieces is a great profit, and the position of minister is a respectful one. But haven't you seen the sacrificial ox used in the suburban sacrifices? After being fed for several years, it is garbled in patterned embroidery so that it may be led into the great temple. At this point, though it might wish to be a solitary piglet, how could that be? Go away quickly, sir. Do not pollute me. I'd rather enjoy myself playing around in a fetid ditch than be held in bondage by the ruler of a kingdom I will never take office for as long as I live, for that is what pleases my fancy. Examining this, we should first of all note that Sima Qian's biography was written around the year 104 BCE, nearly 2 centuries after the death of Zhuangzi. It is curious that of the 5 chapter titles he mentions, one, chapter 10, is from the Waipian, outer chapters, 4, chapters 31, 29, 10, and perhaps 23, cited twice under 2 different titles, are from the Zapian, miscellaneous chapters, and not one is from the Nepian, inner chapters. Furthermore, the allegory he quotes in the second paragraph is a longer and somewhat garbled version of the 13th section of chapter 32. Sima Qian's choice of chapters to cite is puzzling because it is the inner chapters that modern scholars believe to contain the most authentic chapters in the book, those linked most closely to Zhuangzi. It is odd, though, that even in the inner chapters he is referred to as Zhuangzi and not Zhuangzi. Using a polite designation, one would not think he would choose for himself. It is thus clear that already by the time of Sima Qian, the Zhuangzi had evolved far beyond the work of a single individual. To be sure, a close reading of the extant edition, which derives from the 33-chapter recension of Guozhang, 252 to 312, reveals that the text could not possibly have been written by one author. Aside from the obvious internal inconsistencies in language, style, and content among the various chapters, it is highly improbable that the distanced, third-person appraisal of Zhuangzi and other thinkers in the final chapter could have been written by him. In fact, we may now turn to this impressionistic assessment of Master Zhuang as another primary source which may help somewhat to expand our vague picture of the man. Obscure and formless, ever-transforming and inconstant. Are we alive? Are we dead? Do we coexist with heaven and earth? Do we go along with spiritual intelligence? How nebulous! Where are we going? How blurred! Where are we aiming? The myriad beings being arrayed all around, there is none fit for us to return to. A portion of the ancient techniques of the way lay in these practices. Zhuangzi heard of such usages and delighted in them. With absurd expressions, extravagant words, and unbounded phrases, he often gave rein to his whims, but was not presumptuous and did not look at things from one angle only. Believing that all under heaven were sunk in stupidity and could not be talked to seriously, he used impromptu words for his effusive elaboration, quotations for the truth, and metaphors for breadth. Alone he came and went with the essential spirits of heaven and earth, but was not arrogant toward the myriad beings. He did not scold others for being right or wrong, but abode with the mundane and the vulgar. Although his writings are exotic and convoluted, there is no harm in them. Although his phraseology is irregular and bizarre, it merits reading. His fecundity is inexhaustible. Above he wanders with the Creator of things, and below he is friends with those who are beyond life and death, and without beginning or end. Regarding the root, he is expansive and open, profound and unrestrained. Regarding the ancestor, he is attuned and ascendant. Nonetheless, in his response to evolution and in his emancipation from things, his principles are not exhaustive and his approach is not metamorphosing. How nebulous! How cryptic! Someone who has never been fully fathomed. Although there is really nothing of substance in this description to assist us in our quest for the historical Master Zhuang, it does enable us to understand how he was viewed when this chapter was written, probably around the 3rd quarter of the 2nd century BCE, at the court of the Prince of Huainan, Liu An, 179 to 122 BCE. The emphasis on Zhuangzi's particular language and the difficulty of pinning him down to any hard and fast philosophical position is evident throughout. The historical development of the text is as difficult to pinpoint as its author. According to chapters 32, Li Yuku, and 20, The Mountain Tree, Zhuangzi had a number of disciples, but there are no clear records of exactly who they were. Possible traces of his intellectual lineage may be discerned in several chapters dealing with quietism and yogic practices in other philosophical texts of the same period, including the Guanzi, the Hanfeizi, the Huainanzi, and the Luxi Chunqiu. From these documents, it appears that Master Zhuang's school was rather influential in the states of Chu and Qi during the late Warring States period and helped shape the cosmopolitical thinking of Huang Lao under the Han. Later developments. Later, however, during the staunchly legalist Qin dynasty and the overtly Confucian Han dynasty, the text Zhuangzi was not much acclaimed. It rose somewhat more to the foreground again after the Three Kingdoms period, when it received attention from writers such as He Yan, died 249. In the biography of Cao Zhi, 192-232, He Yan's fondness for the Tao Te Ching and Zhuangzi is noted, while the biography of Wang Zan, 177-217, says that Ruanzhi, 210-263, took Zhuangzhou as his model, and Ji Kang, 223-262, admired the words of Master Lao and Master Zhuang. Clearly, as also documented in the contemporaneous movement of Xuanshui, profound learning, a great intellectual and religious shift was taking place in China at this time, which saw a revival of Taoist and divination texts such as the Yi Ching over and above the Confucian classics, dominant until then. Best represented by the thinkers Wang Bi, 226-249, and Guo Xiang, it expressed itself in commentaries to the ancient Taoist classics. The elevation of the Zhuangzi is a gauge of the direction this religious shift was headed. Numerous early medieval poets, thinkers, and artists, notably calligraphers, took recourse to the Zhuangzi in formulating their visions and ideals. Around the same time, Zhuangzhou is first described as an object of veneration. The Western Jin writer Ji Han created a Diao Zhuangzhou Tu Wen, essay on a painting of mourning for Zhuangzhou, in which he remarked that in houses they sing praises of Tiang Kuang, in homes they paint the likenesses of Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi. In his preface, he also notes that a certain noble, the imperial son-in-law Wang Hongyuan, had a portrait of Zhuangzhou installed in his mansion and encouraged courtiers to come and mourn before it. Impact on Taoism and Buddhism. In the 4th century, the Zhuangzi, in both its terminology and vision of ecstatic freedom, became a major contributor to the imagery and literary world of Shangqing, highest clarity Taoism, which takes up a number of its key terms. Examples are the perfected person, great clarity, the great one, freedom from affairs, fasting the mind, making all things equal, and sitting in oblivion. Still, the use of the same terms does not mean an identity in worldview, and there are a number of key concepts in which the thought of the Zhuangzi differs significantly from that of Shangqing. Nevertheless, the fact that Zhuangzi terms play an important role in the religion documents the continued impact of the text. After that, it was influential in the adaptation of Buddhism into China, and it is no accident that a prominent commentary to the text was written by Ji Dun, the first aristocratic monk of medieval China. In addition, the Zhuangzi contributed significantly to the formulation of Chan, Japanese Zen, Buddhism, as a fusion of Buddhist ideology and ancient Taoist thought. Both share a mutual distrust of language, an insistence that the Tao is found in everything, even excrement, and a dialogue style involving riddles or gong'an, Japanese koan. Liu Guangyi, discussing the same issue, goes even further and, without making an outright claim of any direct influence, proposes that there is a historical bond of a deeper sort between Master Zhuang and the Buddha. His view, moreover, was anticipated by Ma Shulun, 1958, and Takasu Yoshijiro, 1944, who separately theorized that there are enough passages in the Zhuangzi having ideas similar to Buddhist dogma, and there are enough possible references to Buddhist followers in North China during the transitional period in which the text was compiled to demonstrate the influence of this Indian religion on some of its authors, if not upon Zhuangzhou himself. Even if Ma and Takasu are right, it may be more accurate to refer generally to Indian or Indo-European rather than specifically Buddhist influence. Under the Tang dynasty, the Zhuangzi finally became a bona fide classic when it was canonized as the Nanhua Zhenjing, perfect scripture of southern fluorescence, by an imperial edict of Emperor Xuanzong in 742, the first year of the Tianbao, Heavenly Treasure, reign period. At the same time, Master Zhuang was awarded the title Nanhua Zhenren. This title was further expanded to Wei Miao Yuan Tong Zhenjun, perfected lord of subtlety and primal comprehension. Under the Song Emperor Huizong, 1100 to 1125. Then, as well as also under the Ming and Qing, a number of new religious commentaries and literary glosses to the text appeared, assuring the continued fruitfulness and relevance of the text. Commentators then included major Song statesmen and poets such as Wang Anshi, 1021 to 1086, and Su Shi, 1037 to 1101, and were most successfully collected in Jiao Hong's 1541 to 1620 Zhuangzi Yi, Aid for Reading the Zhuangzi. The text. Chapters. The 33 chapters of the extant recension of the Zhuangzi are as follows. 1. Zhao Yao Yu, Carefree Wandering. 2. Qi Wu Lun, On the Equality of Things. 3. Yang Sheng Zhu, Essentials for Nurturing Life. 4. Ren Jian Shi, The Human World. 5. De Chong Fu, Symbols of Integrity Fulfilled. 6. Da Zong Shi, The Great Ancestral Teacher. 7. Ying Di Wang, Responses for Emperors and Kings. 8. Pian Mu, Webbed Toes. 9. Mati, Horses' Hooves. 10. Chu Jie, Ransacking Coffers. 11. Zai Yu, Preserving and Accepting. 12. Tian Di, Heaven and Earth. 13. Tian Dao, The Way of Heaven. 14. Tian Yun, Heavenly Revolutions. 15. Ke Yi, Ingrained Opinions. 16. Shan Xing, Mending Nature. 17. Chu Shui, Autumn Floods. 18. Ji Le, Ultimate Joy. 19. Da Sheng, Understanding Life. 20. Shan Mu, The Mountain Tree. 21. Tian Zifang, Sir Square Field. 22. Ji Bei Yu, Knowledge Wanders North. 23. Geng Sang Chu. 24. Shu Wu Gui, Ghostless Shu. 25. Zi Yang, Sunny. 26. Wai Wu, External Things. 27. Yu Yan, Metaphors. 28. Rang Wang, Abdicating Kingship. 29. Dao Zhi, Robber Footpad. 30. Shuo Jian, Discoursing on Swords. 31. Yu Fu, An Old Fisherman. 32. Lie Yu Ku. 33. Tian Sha, All Under Heaven. The first 7 chapters of the text, ever since the Han Dynasty, have been referred to as the inner chapters. Since Guo Shang, the next 15 have been known as the outer chapters, and the last 11 as the miscellaneous chapters. The inner chapters are widely regarded as the most authentic, while the outer and miscellaneous chapters are considered to have varying degrees of closeness to the thought and style of Zhuangzi. As a matter of fact, scholars of all dynasties, from Guo Shang, died 312, and Han Yu, 768 to 824, through Su Shi and Jiao Hong to Wang Fuji, 1619 to 1692, harbored some doubts that all of the chapters in the Zhuangzi were from the hand of a single author. Modern scholarship has made enormous progress in separating out the various strands and layers of what is surely an accretional anthology composed of a rather diverse combination of late Warring States and Han period elements. Schools. A rough consensus is that, in addition to the inner chapters which are attributed to Zhuangzi and his immediate disciples, the Zhuangzi contains material from the following 5 major schools. 1. A group of primitivists who were influenced by the old masters, such as Lao Tzu, and who were active around the end of the Qin dynasty, or the beginning of the Han, chapters 8 to 10, parts of 11, 12, and 14. 2. Advocates of the hedonist Yang Zhu, 5th century BCE, who were active around 200 BCE, chapters 28 to 31. 3. A syncretist group of eclectic thinkers who may have been responsible for compiling the text sometime between 180 and 130 BCE, chapters 12 to 16, 33. 4. Later followers of Zhuangzi who strove to imitate the style and themes of the inner chapters, chapters 17 to 22, and 5. anthologists who collected fragmentary materials, including some that may derive from Zhuangzi himself, and which could therefore also be placed in the inner chapters, chapters 23 to 27, 32. Taken together, the stuff of the Zhuangzi appears to have coalesced over a period of a little more than a century, i.e. from the late 4th to the early 2nd century BCE. The prince of Huainan, Liu An, and advisors at his court may have played a major role in the selection, arrangement, and interpretation of the material of the text that thenceforth came to be known as the Zhuangzi. Composition. The composition of the Zhuangzi is actually less neat and tidy than the above scheme would indicate. Even the inner chapters are problematic, and the fact that the process of redaction continued actively down to the 4th century CE means that the text was subject to substantial editorial manipulation beyond the formative period of the late Warring States and the early Western Han. The most sophisticated, systematic, and thorough analysis of the various components of the Zhuangzi is that by Christopher Rand, 1983. He offers a complete list of all 212 sections of the extant recension, with characterizations in each section of the matrical patterns, mystical, individualist, primitivist, rationalist, and indeterminate, and commonalities such as dialectical reasoning based on relativism, intuitive imagination based on experiential knowledge, recognition and acceptance of an all-encompassing and eternal Tao, Wei, preservation of one's De, virtue, as the functioning of Tao in man, and Wu Wei, inaction, non-action, in accordance with the Tao De. Liu, 1994, presents a more traditional but nonetheless influential vision of the text's composition, asserting its origin before the Qin dynasty. Regardless of the details of composition over which scholars will continue to debate, the Zhuangzi, as it has come down to us, cannot possibly all be attributed to a single author. The writing varies greatly in quality and contains many different points of view, some of which are quite contradictory. Thus we encounter in the Zhuangzi both idealism and materialism, non-action and purposeful action, at least on the part of underlings, reclusion and engagement, an ascetic limitation of desires and Epicureanism, eclecticism and exclusivism, etc. Strangely enough, several of the chapters, for example the Heaven chapters, 12 to 14, even seem to be championing Confucian attitudes. This is peculiar in light of the fact that Confucius is Master Zhuang's favorite target of satire in other parts of the book. These stark contrasts of viewpoint reflect the developments and interactions that took place within Huang Lao and other schools of thought during the late Warring States and Qin Han periods in response to the social and political transformations occurring at the time. Not only was the composition and formation of the Zhuangzi an extremely complicated process, the same may be said of its subsequent textual history. Indeed, there is much about the early editorial and redactional history of the text that is quite vague. Commentaries. According to the bibliographical treatise of the Han Shu, History of the Han, written by Ban Gu, 32 to 92, on a foundation prepared by Liu Xin, died 23, the Zhuangzi contained 52 chapters. During the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, several commentaries, all now lost, were written on the Zhuangzi, and 2 of these were based on a 52-chapter recension. One was by a certain Mr. Meng, of whom nothing is known. Another, by Sima Biao, 240 to 306, in 21 scrolls, consisted of 7 inner, 28 outer, 14 miscellaneous, and 3 interpretive chapters. 3 further commentaries from around the same time were based on redactions with different numbers of chapters. 1. Cui Chuan, 10 scrolls with 7 inner and 20 outer for a total of 27 chapters. 2. Xiang Shu, 20 scrolls presumably with 7 inner and approximately 20 outer chapters. 3. Li Yi, 30 scrolls with 30 or 35 chapters. 4 significant observations may be made about these Jin period commentaries on the Zhuangzi. 1. The 52-chapter version of the Han period survived until at least the 4th century. 2. The number of outer chapters begins to destabilize during the 3rd century. 3. Most versions from the 3rd and 4th centuries still do not have a section of miscellaneous chapters. 4. Most versions would appear to share a relatively stable core of 7 inner chapters. The latter characteristic is somewhat reassuring in the sense that it tends to sanction the inner chapters as those which the majority of early editors and commentators agreed on as typifying the Zhuangzi, whether or not they were written by Zhuangzhou himself. Aside from the relative stability of the inner chapters, the most notable feature of the flurry of Jin period editorial activity is that it clearly shows the high degree of flux that the text was in at that time. Guoxiang. By far the most important Jin period commentary and rearrangement of the Zhuangzi is that by Guoxiang, which consisted of 33 chapters in 33 scrolls. Guo's version eventually replaced the other competing redactions and is the basis of all extant editions of the Zhuangzi. According to information provided in the preface of Lu Deming's 556-627 Jingdian Shiwen explanation of terms in the classics, and in Guo's own annotations, the latter must have carried out a major revision of the text. If, as is likely, Guo began with the 52-chapter version bequeathed from the Han period, he would have reduced the text to a little over 2/3 of its original size. His editorial activity may have included the removal of passages that made no sense to him and of those similar to works such as the Shanhai Jing, Classic of Mountains and Seas, and books of dream prognostications. In his commentary, which was written under the aegis of the reigning tendency of profound learning, Guoxiang dwells on the relationship between being and non-being, between action and non-action, emphasizing spontaneity or naturalness and the attainment of harmony with the cosmos by realizing one's inner nature, Xing, the share, Fen, one is given of the Tao, and destiny, Ming, the principle, Li, of the cosmos active in one's life. Guoxiang's commentary is usually accompanied by the sub-commentary of the early Tang Taoist master Cheng Xuanying, flourished 630 to 660. In subsequent centuries, numerous commentaries, sub-commentaries, phonological and philological notes, and so forth were composed for the Zhuangzi. There were also collections or selections of previous commentaries and sub-commentaries, particularly during the Qing period. Some of these are massive and comprehensive. The most convenient and widely used of these compilations is Guo Qingfan's 1844 to 1896 Zhuangzi Jishi, collected explanations on the Zhuangzi of the year 1894. Lin Shiyi. Because of its protean nature and extremely complicated textual history, it is inevitable that the Zhuangzi will be read in many different ways. One of the most remarkable pre-modern interpretive studies, and which is poorly known, is that of Lin Shiyi, circa 1200 to 1273, the Zhuangzi Kuoyi, oral signification of the Zhuangzi, dated to 1261. The author of similar interpretations of the Tao Te Ching and the Liezi, Lin sought to provide clear and easy explanations of the sort that could be used in the oral portions of an examination. He also claimed to have dabbled with Buddhist books and applied what he learned there to his exegesis of the Zhuangzi and other Taoist books. This enabled him to find something that, in fact, earlier scholars had not fully realized. It is especially interesting that he wished to wash away the crudities of Guoxiang for the old transcendent of the southern fluorescence. Luo Mian Dao. Another intriguing interpretation of the Zhuangzi from a slightly later period is Luo Mian Dao's, died 1367, Nanhua Jianjing Shunben, complying with the original meaning of the perfect scripture of the southern cultural fluorescence. Luo opines that previous commentators had seriously distorted the Zhuangzi by elaborating pure talk, or dragging in the language of Zen, or forcefully applying the orthodox opinions of the Confucians, none of which point to the meaning of the original text. Consequently, he strove to explicate the Zhuangzi as much as possible with pre-Qin materials. Lu Shixing. A common assumption among Taoist scholars and practitioners is that the Zhuangzi constitutes an outgrowth of the Tao Te Ching. A good example of an interpretive text which espouses this view is Lu Shixing's 1520 to 1601 Nanhua Jianjing Fu Mo, the true scripture of the southern fluorescence and assistant ink, in 8 scrolls, today contained in the Zhangwei Dao Shu, Taoist texts outside the canon. Although the title is taken from a figure briefly alluded to in Chapter 6 as the immediate source of esoteric knowledge about the way, Lu's text is an explication of the whole of the Zhuangzi. Dividing the latter up into sections, it relates the gist of each. At the conclusion of every chapter, there are verses of a song which briefly summarize its contents. Lu Shixing believes that the Zhuangzi functions as a commentary on the Tao Te Ching, and that, if one wishes to understand the former, one must first carefully read the latter. Thus, in explicating the titles and contents of the various chapters in the Zhuangzi, Lu frequently asserts that they are derived from certain passages or ideas in the Tao Te Ching. For example, he maintains that the main idea of the second chapter, on the equality of things, most likely comes from Lao Tzu's mysterious identity, Xuan Tong. Similarly, the 8th chapter, Webbed Toes, takes the way and virtue as fundamental, but considers benevolence and righteousness as adventitious excrescences. This is held to be precisely comparable to the formulation in the Tao Te Ching that after the way is lost, then there is virtue. After virtue is lost, then there is benevolence. And after benevolence is lost, there is righteousness. Chapter 18. A noteworthy feature of this study is that, in an effort to demonstrate the essential unity of the Zhuangzi, it frequently uses passages from the book itself to explicate and verify its sections. Yet Lu's approach is also eclectic in that he applies Buddhist ideas to elucidate the Zhuangzi. Likewise, he also occasionally alludes to debates among Confucian scholars to convey his understanding of passages in the text. Lu's commentary was well regarded by other exegetes and was frequently cited in comprehensive commentaries such as Jiao Hong's Zhuangzi Yi.